In today's episode of Rejlers Play, Nuclear Power and AI. Why is the US investing so much in nuclear power? Europe is falling behind. What is the US doing differently? Where will Blykalla build its first nuclear reactor? Stick around for this interview to learn more. Hi, welcome to a new episode of Rejlers Play. Swedish nuclear company Blykalla wants to build 6 small reactors in Sweden. But at the same time, a nuclear race is accelerating in the US, driven in large part by tech companies and the enormous power demand of AI and data centers. Blykalla is therefore expanding fast in the American market. So where will the first commercial reactor actually be built? Sweden or the US? I'm joined by Jakob Stedman, CEO at Blykalla. Welcome back to Rejlers Play, Jakob.
Thank you. Great to be back.
How are you?
I'm doing well.
Yeah.
I really like this format, and I enjoyed our latest chat.
Yeah, and you're more than welcome anytime. So, Jakob, you want to build new reactors outside Gävle in Sweden. What will the project cost? Who carries the risk? And when do you think the first reactor will be ready?
Yeah, we haven't spoken. I'm going to disappoint you here a bit, Jesper. We haven't spoken about Kroner and Ören yet, so I can't say exactly.
No.
But we are talking about, tens of billion of kroner.
Yeah.
So it's 6 reactors in total, 300 megawatt approximately. And that, of course, means that it's a sizable investment for the community and also creating lots of job, both, of course, when we build it, but also over the years to come when we operate it.
And the risk will be carried between you and the state government, the state?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The financing mechanism in Sweden it is pretty unique in a sort of international setting because the government is fairly active. And I think it's quite cleverly designed because the government does things that doesn't cost so much for the taxpayers, but still provides value for the developers such as ourselves. So, for example, the government provides cheap debt through the balance sheet of the state, basically. And that's an elegant way to give access to capital, so we can actually do the construction, but it's still not a classical subsidy. Then, on the other hand, there is also a price hedging mechanism, which does have a financial implication potentially, depending on how the market develops. And that's also an important component. So we know that our calculations can have a certain revenue for a number of years. That makes it easier for us to ensure that investors get their money back.
So it's attractive for you as well, of course, then. But when do you think, realistically, the 6 reactors can be built and ready to go?
It depends a lot on political factors and regulatory factors, the regulatory process. We've talked about it as the first half of the 30s, so I'll have to leave it at that. Yeah. But of course, we want to get it done as soon as possible.
Yeah. We talked about Sweden now. Now we're going to talk a bit about America, the US, because Blykalla is expanding rapidly in the US. Why is the US market so much hotter than any other markets right now? For nuclear power?
I think it's 3 reasons. First, it is easier to build, especially demonstration units. Second is because the financial markets are deeper. There's much more capital to bet on what you could call deep tech or innovative technology, hardware. And third is because customers are there. Data centers are one of the more forward-leaning types of customers here. And of course, they're headquartered there and they expand faster there than elsewhere.
You have big tech there also.
Exactly. Yeah. The big tech, to a large extent, is runs building the data centers. Yeah.
Not long ago, Jakob, Blykalla was a kind of a startup. And now you're expanding. You want to build nuclear in Sweden, new nuclear power in Sweden, and now you're in the US as well. You have an office there. Tell us about what comes next and what you do right now.
Yeah, exactly. So we started an office, actually 2 offices, starting our second office in Austin, Texas. As I said, I mean, the US is important for these reasons I mentioned. And let's maybe talk about the most concrete thing is when to build the first nuclear reactor in the US. And I think Sweden is a great place for building commercial nuclear. But when it comes to demonstration units, there's no basically fast track in Sweden for that. Basically, even if we want to build a 10 megawatt demonstration unit to illustrate how things work in a live setting, that would take as long time basically to process as a full-scale nuclear power plant. Similar to Oskarshamn 3 or 4, sort of future 1 gigawatt reactor. It still takes almost as many years. And I think that doesn't allow itself for innovation. because I think it's really important when you have innovation that you have a graded approach. And if you look at the reactor that's extremely small and extremely safe, I think it makes sense that the processing and evaluation and assessment of this technology is faster than something that's going to be a 10-year construction project.
So you can use the data from the test reactor in US also in Sweden?
That's the thing, right? That's the beauty of it. So even if we just optimize for building commercial nuclear in Sweden, and of course we have broader visions than that, but even if you just optimize for building commercial nuclear in Sweden, it's going to be faster, most likely for us to build a first demonstration unit in the United States, and then taking the data and the operational experience back to our application in Sweden. So this is really shortcut that I think is extremely relevant for players like us, and that's why we want to ensure we can use this and build a first reactor.
And you also collaborate with Oklo?
Yeah, exactly. So Oklo is an important partner, and they co-led our latest round, our A2 round last year, and they will remain an important part in both on the financial investing together, the financial side, but also on operationally, looking at building things together, having business model that are aligned, that we can be part of their future parks, for example.
Energy has already become the bottleneck for AI. Meta, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft have all signed multi-gigawatt nuclear deals, I think. How important has the AI become for the comeback of new nuclear power?
No, but it's very important. And I think the reason is that the data center players, or the hyperscalers, as they're called, they are much more forward-leaning. I mean, of course, if you look at all electricity users, data centers is a fairly small part still of electricity consumption. But there are two differences. One is that they expand. Most heavy industry doesn't really expand that much. Maybe that will change as we reshore things or as the green transition, if that sort of catches up speed again. But the fact is that most capex are not done in Europe in that would drive power usage. And then the second thing is really that they have deep pockets. Big tech, many of the hyperscalers are either served or owned by the big tech companies. So they can afford to invest in power supply. So I think when we look at the market, a lot of the action comes from building power for data centers.
You don't hear about that a lot here in Europe, about the massive new nuclear power aim in the US. You mostly hear about other stuff going on in that country. But are you surprised that they're heavily investing in new nuclear power in America?
No. I mean, I think everybody who follows the US to some extent, I think, see that, of course, there's a lot of media reports about different shallow things happening in...
you hear about drill, baby drill, and oil companies and so on, but not so much about nuclear power.
No, exactly. I mean, the US is a continent, right? It's a complex 300 million people. Of course, there is a political divide, as we all know, and that triggers news cycles. But I think if you scratch a bit under the surface, the US is extremely pro-business and really wants to build things that create jobs and actually uses a lot of power. Reshoring, for example, has been a big push in the last few years. And that really means that, both industrials will most likely start investing more and more in the US. And I think in Europe, it's a similar but slower trend. And then, of course, as we talked about the data centers. So that means that power needs to be created. The US has a roadmap to quadruple the nuclear fleet. They have 100 gigawatt of nuclear capacity today. They're going to 400 gigawatts in 25 years. That's even faster than the global roadmap, which is tripling the nuclear capacity.
In Sweden, we talk about 10 gigawatt.
Exactly. So we talk about adding 10 gigawatt of nuclear capacity. Today, we have 6 operating reactors, I guess on average about a gigawatt. So let's say we talk about tripling as well in Sweden, which is then in line with the sort of global plans, but US plans are faster.
Vad kul att du tittar på Rejlers Play. Blir väldigt glad för det. Och ett sätt för dig att hålla dig uppdaterad när nya avsnitt kommer, det är att prenumerera. Gå in och prenumerera här. Och kommentera gärna också. Och sprid intervjun till dina kompisar så blir vi ännu gladare. Förresten, visste du att vi också finns som podcast? Och då heter vi Nytänkarna. Kan vara bra att veta. Nu ska du få gå tillbaka till intervjun. But Jakob, building new nuclear power takes time, while tech companies need huge amount of energy and they need it quickly. Could that be a disadvantage for nuclear business? Could other energy sources seize this opportunity before new nuclear is ready?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not concerned. I think, this is not about nuclear being the solution for everything.
No.
I think you need different sources of power. I think renewables, for one thing, intermittent power are important as well. Intermittent power basically means that some hours of the day when the wind blows or the sun shines, you're going to get low power prices. And that means lower average power prices for electricity users, which is great, right? So I think intermittent power is clearly part of the solution. I think especially in the US, you have a lot of investment in gas turbines, combined cycle gas turbines, as a kind of like a intermediate solution. Sometimes you even see developers that offer like, first we bring in a CCGT, as it's called, the gas turbine that combusts natural gas, and then eventually this will be replaced by reactor once they are ready. So it's an elegant way for a customer to get power as soon as possible, but then a more sustainable baseload, carbon-free baseload once that's technically possible.
So that's not a major concern for you?
It's not. I mean, I think in any industry, if you say like, okay, we have macro trend saying we're going to quadruple the installed fleet, are you concerned it's not more than a quadrupling? I think the answer is no, I'm not concerned.
No.
It's plenty of work. I think the hard thing here in nuclear is the supply constraints and starting to build. And go from 100 to 400 gigawatt, that's trillions of dollars of investment.
Yeah.
So I'm not concerned about other electricity sources being part of this. On the contrary, I think that's great.
Yeah, all right. Big tech is already among the nuclear industry's most important customers, you told us. But does that shift the power balance in energy? Or are the hyperscalers effectively becoming the new utilities?
In essence, I mean, they are. The buyers of nuclear power plants used to be utilities.
Yeah.
And for various reasons, they sort of stepped back from that role. Some of them good, some of them maybe less good. And now, I don't think the core business of a hyperscaler is not operating a nuclear power plant. So you need somebody to do it. You effectively create a new small utility to do it. In wind, you talk about these as independent power producers, IPPs. So what I think is going to happen now in nuclear is that you see the same thing. You're going to create either some utilities step forward and like raise their hand and say, we will once again build nuclear power and we will operate it. Or you create small utilities that do it. I think it makes sense to have a specialized company that operates nuclear power plants because it's such an extremely specialized and complex operation that as a data center you probably want to not be too involved in. So, but I think it's true that we're seeing a shift that other players can move faster than the classic utilities. And I think it's not the first time in history that a slow-moving incumbent is complemented by a more fast-moving company.
Do you think we could see a future where data centers have their own nuclear reactors right next door, more or less?
For sure. For sure. I think that's already happening. Or the plans are being taken to make that happen. I think to some extent you could do what's called a virtual PPA, that you as a data center provide power. There's a big debate in the US, but also in Sweden, about what's sometimes called rate pay protection. Sometimes data centers get negative publicity because when they arrive to community, they have a lot of demand for power and then prices scrap. And that's in nobody's interest, and I think politicians have realized this over the world. So then what's happening now is basically bring your own power. So then data centers say like, okay, we'll build here, we'll create some jobs, maybe not enormous amounts of jobs, but we'll build here, which is important for sovereignty and having control of your digital infrastructure. And then we'll bring our own power. So consumers aren't affected. And which is of course great for players like us, because we are happy to help them provide that. So that I think is and then sometimes the power is literally next door, especially if you have a solution such as ours, where it's easy to plan them close to the actual data center. Sometimes it's virtual, so you could have like hundreds of kilometers away, but you still know that in the same electricity area, me as a data center takes responsibilities for adding supply, so users don't see price hikes. So I think both models will happen.
The US has moved aggressively on licensing reform while Europe is a bit slower. What did the US change that Europe hasn't in this case?
I think the difference is bigger when it comes to innovation. When it comes to commercial power, I think the US is moving faster there as well, but I think the gap is smaller. Let's start on the demonstration side or the sort of innovation side, I think then the difference is night and day. So in the US, there's a program which is run by the Department of Energy, where you can basically apply for, as a nuclear developer, to build a demonstration unit. And that takes a few months of processing to get this done. Oklo, our friends and partners, just built a nuclear reactor in 1 year in Texas. 1 year. From 1 year ago, it was a greenfield site. They had just got accepted to this program, got the authorization. Now it's built.
In Sweden, we talk about 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. And now you talk about 10 years for building in Halland. And that's, of course, that's a 1.5 gigawatts, so that's a totally different beast. It's a much bigger reactor. But the point is, in Sweden, everything takes the same time, no matter if it's a very small unit or a very big complex. And I think in the US they realize these are different, and then they optimize to solve innovation. Because the US has a mindset that we want to be an innovative part. We want to be a place where companies come to invent new stuff. And we want to be the leader in attracting global companies to come to us and build. I think being European, I think I'm sad to say that Europe and Sweden doesn't really have that mindset. I think we're happy if innovation happens. And we've seen that in software especially. Sweden obviously is a pretty good place to start a software company. We have lots of those, from Spotify to Lovable and so on. But we don't have as many transformative deep tech companies. Because they're harder to start, they need more infrastructure around them, they need investors that are more patient and have different expectations. And that's not the ecosystem we have.
But what would Sweden need to change to compete for these kinds of investments then?
I mean, I think it comes back to these three things I mentioned initially. I think we need regulation, we need investors, and we need customers. Without any of these three things, I think we will not be a competitive destination.
Last question.
Yep.
Where do you think your first commercial reactor will be built? Sweden or US?
The diplomatic answer, it's up to our customers and investors.
That's the boring answer.
and I guess the regulators, so that's a boring answer. I mean, coming back to what we talked about for the last 15 minutes, I think things are moving fast in the US.
Yeah.
I would love to build commercial nuclear power in Sweden, but it does mean that it needs different parts of the ecosystem needs to come together: regulators, investors, customers. If I were to make like a guess today, I would say yes, but let's hope I'm wrong.
All right. Nice meeting you again, and thank you for spreading a lot of knowledge about the nuclear race in America, which Blykalla is a part of right now. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
welcome back.
Yeah, thanks. It's been great to be here.
And thanks for watching Rejlers Play, and stay tuned for more interesting episodes. See you. Bye-bye.